It's 3:50, so I think I might go ahead and get started. Hello, everyone, and welcome. Hello, come on in. Okay, that's all right. My name is Angela Hakim, and I am presenting on an example of EAP-informed student support and teacher support in an emerging EMI university. If you're all in the right place, just saying that in case someone has ended up in the wrong place. I thought I'd start with just a brief outline. Today I'll start with a brief introduction and overview of the study and the institutional context. I will say that my presentation might be a bit different from others in that I originally planned this talk to be part of a symposium. I kind of added on a discussion at the end regarding my findings. Okay, so I will quickly go through those. My original purpose was to describe the case in detail, providing much more of a descriptive account. But since I'm here alone, I'll also discuss the findings of a case study, which I'll describe in a bit as well. So I'll spend quite a bit of time talking about the development of teaching and learning resources, which were developed through a collaborative approach, which I'll describe as well. And then I will talk about, briefly give a summary of some of the key findings from a case study as well, which relate to the feasibility, benefits, and challenges of the particular approach that was adopted. And I'll close with a discussion of a few implications. So, as many of us well know, there has been global growth, and there continues to be global growth in English medium instruction. And along with this growth in EMI practice, there has been an expansion of English language teaching provision and a transition toward teaching of English for academic purposes as well in these EMI contexts. Along with this growth in EMI practice, there has also been development of EMI literature and a body of work which focuses more broadly on several issues. Within this body of work, there has been definitely a recognition of some of the language-related challenges that students face, as well as recognition of widespread student dissatisfaction with the kind of generalized English language support or English for general academic purposes support that exists in these contexts as well. In recognition of this, many EMI scholars have called for a move toward discipline-specific support as well, and part and parcel of that have called for greater collaboration between EAP specialists and subject lecturers or content specialists. And this echoes calls within some of the EAP literature, which for quite a long time has called for a move toward discipline-specific support and greater collaboration between EAP specialists and EMI lecturers. But there hasn't always been cross-fertilization between EAP and EMI research. And that's unfortunate because there are certainly pedagogical frameworks in particular within EAP which talk about staff and student development and staff and student support and could certainly be informative for EMI practice and research as well. In the talk today, my primary goal is to address calls within some of the EAP and EMI literature for explorations of collaboration and student support and teacher support. And as I mentioned before, I also will talk about some of the key findings from a larger case study, but I will have to go through those quite quickly. I've just described these aims. So let me talk a little bit about the study. The larger case study from which I will discuss some of the key findings is a single case study focused on one partial English medium instruction institution in Beirut, Lebanon. The focus of the case study was on exploring the implementation of university-wide, tailored, that is discipline-specific EAP provision, which has been revamped to be English for specific academic purposes rather than what it was before, which was exam-driven, largely exam-driven and generalized, following an EGAP approach. In this study, I sought primarily to understand the different stakeholders' perceptions of the feasibility of their particular approach, which I'll describe in just a moment, as well as their perceptions of the usefulness of this particular approach, the discipline-specific approach, which was underpinned and facilitated through collaboration and genre-based pedagogy. In order to gain an understanding of the EAP tutors, discipline lecturers, and students' perceptions of the usefulness and feasibility and challenges with this particular approach that was adopted, I utilized a mixed methods design. It's complex, and it would take a long time for me to really describe in a way that is sufficient. So I will just briefly say that this study followed 2 tracks, the first of which was a sequential mixed method design in order to gain an understanding of students' perceptions of the particular approach. I held classroom observations and student focus groups, and also sent out a student questionnaire. In track 2, I was trying to gain a better understanding of the EAP tutors and the discipline lecturers' perceptions of the approach, again relating to feasibility, usefulness, and the challenges that they encountered. And I did this through a concurrent design using semi-structured interviews, collecting field notes, and analyzing documents as well. And of course, the participants I have mentioned as well include the students who were in the revamped EAP modules, the AP tutors who developed materials and collaborated with discipline specialists, and the discipline specialists who in turn were collaborating with the EAP tutors. I do want to describe the institutional context because it's critical to the example that I described today. So this institution might be considered a partial English medium instruction institution, which means that there are select courses, programs, departments, and modules that are taught through the medium of English. Assessment could occur in one of many languages. Sometimes it occurs through English, sometimes it occurs in Arabic, and sometimes it occurs in French. That's not determined through a university policy decision, but is sort of ad hoc at the discipline lecturer's choice often. There are some key genres which must be completed in English, and I'll describe some of those in just a moment as well. This university is a partial EMI university, and it has been transitioning to a larger role for English in the university, including English medium instruction, over the last 20 years. But the primary, the dominant medium of instruction historically has been French, with Arabic playing a lesser role in instruction in, for example, Arabic language, literature, social sciences, and law. It is truly a multilingual university, and that's reflective of the multilingual linguistic landscape in Lebanon. Along with growth in EMI in the university overall, there is a 5-level English language program. All students are screened upon entry. Regardless of the course that the students are in, they must demonstrate a certain level of proficiency in English language. So the English language program is compulsory. The EAP module is credit-bearing and compulsory, and again, it's delivered university-wide for all students. I'll describe a consultancy that involved my PhD supervisor and I. My PhD supervisor is Ursula Wingate. As part of this consultancy, we worked on revamping the EAP module that I mentioned, first in the School of Engineering and the Faculty of Sciences, and then it's continued in a phase rolled out since. This consultancy involved 3 phases, and Ursula and I first worked with an engineering lecturer to kind of try out this particular approach, which I describe next, before subsequently there were 7 other EAP tutors that followed the same process. Okay, so we worked with a discipline lecturer to develop a set of materials which again were tailored to the students' discipline courses and focused on a key genre that was completed in English in the student's particular discipline, again in the School of Engineering and the Faculty of Sciences at first. After we developed that one set of materials and worked with a discipline lecturer to do so, we used those as an example in a workshop that we led for EAP tutors. This initial workshop was held for 2 hours, delivered online. It was not meant to be a one-stop shop, but rather a sort of introduction to the approach, again, which is discipline-specific and genre-based, and I'll describe more in just a moment. The first year was a pilot implementation, again, in the School of Engineering and the Faculty of Sciences, and since then it's been rolled out in other faculties as well. The collaborative approach that we took, first Ursula and I with the engineering lecture, and later EAP tutors with those in 9 other disciplines as well, is based on an approach discussed by Tribble and Wingate in a 2013 paper. So in this approach, we began by selecting a target genre in collaboration with the discipline lecturers, Again, there were a few key features of that target genre or assignment that they had to complete. First, it needed to be one that was completed in English, because not all of their assignments are completed in English. It also had to be key to their particular course, required of all students. Okay, so the discipline lecturers selected a particular genre. They collected examples of high and low scoring student samples. We then collaborated with the discipline lecturers to identify some of the key conventions and practices surrounding those. They also collected and provided to us course documents, rubrics, marking criteria, and many of them went back to these exemplars, which were high and low scoring, the student samples, and provided marginal and summative comments, because that wasn't part of their assessment practices for all of them, okay? So they did do this, and they did do that in English. So they collected those student samples, they went back and commented on them, and then we conducted move analysis on these sets of student samples. Following on from move analysis, we developed a set of learning materials, which included, again, student samples, high and low scoring, with the comments, marginal and summative comments by the discipline lecturers and us, the EAP specialists. There were also annotations on these materials identifying the rhetorical moves, the obligatory and optional rhetorical moves. After we had developed a set of learning materials, we went back to the discipline lecturers to get feedback on what they thought, and also to confirm features of the particular genres for each of these disciplines. And again, this is a process that continues throughout the term as more questions arise, but this was kind of the initial process that we followed. And I think it's important at this point to point out that this process of collaboration is quite key to the title of my talk today, relating to EMI lecture support and development. Because through this process of collaboration, of course, there's a development process for the EAP tutor who becomes more aware of the genre expectations and conventions and disciplinary practices surrounding this particular genre. But it's reciprocal as well, in that the EMI lecturer also becomes more aware of their own assessment practices. Their awareness is raised regarding and made explicit regarding the genres that the students are producing in their particular course. And that'll come out in some of the findings I will discuss. I mentioned the EAP tutor workshop. It's small font. I don't expect you to read it. I put it there in case somebody wants to go back and look at the slide later. As I mentioned, following on from this initial collaboration and development of learning materials, we held a workshop for the EAP tutors who would subsequently be following the same approach to collaborate with discipline lecturers in 9 different disciplines, okay, in the initial pilot year. In this 2-hour workshop, our aim was to introduce this process of collaboration, introduce the target genre, which is, in this case, an engineering design specification report in Nessa & Gardner's classification. And then we asked the EAP tutors to work together using a set of student exemplars to try to develop a task. We didn't expect them to fully complete a set of materials. It was more just kind of to try out what we had been talking about in terms of implementing genre analysis, using the student samples to develop a set of materials. At the end of the workshop, we had some time for reflections on the workshop, as well as discussions of EAP tutors emerging, developing genre knowledge, and sort of discussions around genre-based pedagogy as well. Again, this was an initial conversation, an initial workshop, which was followed up by other workshops and more professional development opportunities as well. After the EAP tutors had been involved in collaboration, materials development, and began teaching, I began to conduct semi-structured interviews with the EAP tutors and the discipline lecturers. And I will briefly describe some of the key findings that came out of those one-on-one interviews, as well as the focus groups with students as well. The first key finding relates to the feasibility of the approach. So in these semi-structured interviews with the discipline lecturers, all of them indicated that the particular approach that we had implemented was feasible within their current workload. And again, this is a very important finding, as this is crucial to the success, the ongoing success and sustainability of this particular approach. I think one extract from a chemistry lecture kind of highlights some of the perceptions that surrounded this workload and feasibility. So this chemistry lecturer said, in fact, it's one report per student per year. Yes, I can do this. And what he's referring to is the process of collaboration, marking and providing feedback on the particular student samples, okay? So he's kind of seeing his role as primarily related to doing that. And so he sees that as feasible within his current workload. The discipline lecturers also suggested that this would be sustainable year on year, but there are certainly disciplinary differences in terms of how they talked about the sustainability. And there was one lecturer, a biology lecturer, who kind of highlighted this in the interview as well. He mentioned that, for example, in his own courses, he might have 40 students in a particular class, and he would have multiple of those per term. And so he was kind of thinking about the number of student samples he might have to collect, provide marking, and comments in English as well, which again, for some of those lecturers was part of their assessment practice already. Some did not do that before our collaborative initiative. The discipline lecturers also mentioned the necessity of incentives in terms of feasibility of the approach continuing on. So the discipline lecturers recommended future incentives, including workload reduction, extra pay for time spent on collaboration and recognition. And one participant, an engineering lecturer in particular, noted, at the end of the day, we work for recognition. So this was certainly most important for him in terms of the kinds of incentives that could be offered. He did not mention what form that recognition might take, but I suppose they could take the form of recognition in promotion documents, for example. Another key finding relates to the benefits of the approach that was implemented. The EMI lecturers indicated their own heightened awareness of their own teaching and assessment practices, which is certainly an important finding from this case study. And what I'm referring to here is the indication by lecturers that their own understanding of their students' sort of understanding of the conventions and how the guidelines of their own assignments, as well as the way they communicated their own expectations about the particular genre that the students were working on, how those had been inadequate, or how they see the gaps between their own expectations and what the students were producing in the student samples. And that came out through discussions through collaboration, where the EAP tutors would highlight, these are the sort of obligatory and optional moves. Here's what we see in terms of the expectations and the guidelines. What do you think about this? And then the discipline lecturers would sort of say, well, no, I actually want to see this, and none of them have it, and I don't know why. So this was made explicit through this process of collaboration and move analysis and development of learning materials. And this led to a few of the discipline lecturers indicating that they did plan on changing their assessment practices. For example, adjusting their assignment guidelines, adding criteria to their marking criteria, and incorporating discussions of the particular genre or assignment within their own lectures. There were a number of benefits as well that were raised in the semi-structured interviews with the EAP tutors. And the first is an increased understanding of the conventions and requirements of the target genres or the assignments that the students were producing in their discipline courses. One of the participants mentioned that she saw her own understanding of these genres and assignments being increased awareness of the do's and don'ts of particular assignments, which is her sort of pragmatic understanding, I think, of the requirements and conventions in a particular genre. They also indicated that they had gained increased pedagogical content knowledge of genre through the materials that were developed, particularly as it relates to instructional knowledge of genre-based approaches and techniques within genre-based approach that we implemented. There were certainly benefits for the students as well. The students indicated that they saw several benefits to the particular approach that was implemented, and the EMI lecturers and the EAP tutors also indicated that they saw increased relevance of the particular types of support that were being provided because they were changed to be discipline specific and focused on assessments within the students' discipline courses. The EAP lecturers also indicated that they saw the materials useful for explicating and clarifying genre conventions and marker expectations, and the students also indicated that they saw these as useful in learning what they saw as previous students' mistakes. Again, this seems like a practical understanding on their part of how in the student exemplars, students had met the expectations and included the rhetorical moves that were required, or they didn't do that, which they sort of interpreted as a mistake, right? The EMI lecturers also indicated that they provided far more detailed and diverse written feedback on the work that they had been commenting on as part of the collaborative approach. Again, several of the EMI lecturers indicated that they did not typically provide written comments, unsurprisingly, written comments on the students' work, and they found themselves providing much more detailed and diverse feedback for students, which is certainly beneficial for the students from the perspective of the EMI lecturers. I'm going to just skip past the next one. There were some challenges that were raised in these interviews as well. The EMI lecturers surprisingly only indicated one particular challenge related to the collaborative approach that was adopted. 2 of the discipline lecturers out of the 8 that were interviewed indicated that they did have some language-related challenges during marking. As they were reading assignments in English and providing comments and feedback in English, 2 of the lecturers indicated that they did see this as a challenge for themselves. And an example of this is the chemistry lecturer who mentioned that he typically would spend 10 minutes providing feedback and marking the lab report that was used as the target genre for collaboration, and he was spending about 20 minutes, he approximated, to do this. So this certainly added time. Still, he said that this would be feasible because it's 1 assignment per student per year. The EAP tutors also indicated their own challenges with the particular approach that was adopted. The most prevalent of which was mentioned by all of the EAP tutors, was uncertainty with the approach. Prior to the implementation of this approach through the collaborative process and through the introduced to the tutors through the workshops and other forms of professional development. Prior to that, they had not heard of genre or genre-based pedagogy. Many of them did not sort of think of themselves as EAP practitioners. Instead, they sort of saw themselves as English as a foreign language or TESOL practitioners, right? So this was quite a shift for them, and they certainly faced uncertainty with the approach that was being adopted. They also saw insufficient instructional time in the EAP module, and this was in part due to the inductive approach that was being used and student-led genre analysis tasks that were part and parcel of the learning materials which were developed. It takes time to scaffold, and it takes time to carry out these kind of inductive genre analysis tasks, and they indicated that this was a challenge for them. 2 of them also mentioned limited or lacking communication from the subject lecturers, which again is not surprising given the literature and what we know about communication and collaboration with subject lecturers. And I'll just close by saying I've done a kind of very quick run through of some of the key findings and described one example which I think might be informative and an instrumental case for those who are working in similar contexts, partial and emerging EMI contexts, who might be considering forms of student support and teacher support. I think that this example provides one of those. In terms of future research, there's certainly room for a lot more, and there could be future research that's focused on the kind of medium to long-term challenges that arise in collaboration and in providing discipline-specific student support. And it would be interesting to see how these collaborative pedagogies might impact EAP practitioner and subject lecturer teaching and assessment practices over the medium to long term, how the collaborations might evolve over time, and how they might impact student outcomes. A topic and an issue that was raised throughout this study related to the professional development needs of the EAP tutors, more than the EMI lecturers. This was something that was raised throughout this case study in multiple places. So certainly more research needs to be done, not only on EMI lecturer professional development needs, which I think are talked about a lot within EMI literature, but also, that is still needed, but also the professional development needs of EAP tutors who are transitioning from teaching English for general academic purposes or English as a foreign language to moving into EAP. And I have recently published 2 articles related to this case study. If you'd like to read more, then here they are. Thank you very much.